Got it. Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining me tonight. I'm excited to have this opportunity to talk about fireflies with you. So I want to thank Jane and Bronwyn and Matthew for helping to make this happen. You'll notice during this talk that I'll switch back and forth between saying firefly and saying lightning bug. Neither one of these is more correct. And I realize that lightning bug is the kind of the more traditional name in Maryland. If you want, go ahead and put in the chat what you grew up calling these critters: fireflies, lightning bugs, or maybe something else, depending on where you grew up. This talk has three main topics. The first is just a quick introduction to fireflies, their natural history, and their conservation status in North America, the US and Canada. Maybe it's more than three topics. The next topic will be just kind of the role that Maryland has played in the study of fireflies. The next section will be an overview of, or kind of a who's who of some species, ranging from species that you'd find in urban green spaces to ones that are of conservation concern and much narrower in their habitat needs. And then finally, I'll talk a bit about what fireflies need from us in order to thrive and coexist with us. A little bit about who I work for. So I'm a endangered species conservation biologist with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, which is a science-based nonprofit that protects nature through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitats. We have 4 main endangered species conservation. That's the program I belong to. Pollinator conservation with a focus on pollinators and other insects in agricultural landscapes, pesticide reduction, and community engagement. The butterfly pictured here on the left is the Xerces blue butterfly. It's the first butterfly known to go extinct in the US due to human activities. So it's both our namesake and a reminder of why we do the work that we do. We take a multi-pronged approach to our work at the Xerces Society. So we do scientific research, then we take our own research and the research of others and translate that research into digestible and practical guidelines and information for all sorts of different audiences. We do engage in some advocacy for minded policies, and then we're also involved in habitat restoration, mostly in agricultural landscapes, adding pollinator habitat, for example, to farms, but also in some other areas as well. At Xerces, we're supported by an amazing community of members who make our work possible. So if there are any Xerces members watching tonight, I just want to say thank you. And if you'd like to become a member, you can do so on our website at xerces.org/donate. So I think that when many people think about insect conservation, what really comes to mind is pollinators, things like bees and butterflies. And I'm talking particularly sort of the general public. I recognize that many of you at the Natural History Society of Maryland, have more diverse perspectives than that. And many times the conversation within the sort of general public goes in the direction of the utilitarian benefits of these animals, the dollar value of their pollination services or our food system's reliance on them. But one of the things that I like about working with fireflies is that we allow them more intrinsic value, and what they offer us, or the values that we find in them, are also more intangible. Things like a sense of awe, intimate connections to places and to people, like our family, or the reminder to treasure what is fleeting. So if someone asked me the question, what does a firefly look like? In many ways, this photo array would be a more truthful response than a bug flying around with its butt lit up. because fireflies spend the bulk of their lives as larvae. It's a phase that can last over 10 months and up to 2 years. If you look at the shaded forest floor at night, I went out last night since it rained here in Massachusetts. I didn't have any luck, but I found them late into the fall. You might find the firefly larva by its greenish glow. And the larval stage is also when fireflies carry out one of their important roles in the ecosystem. They're predators, feeding on snails, slugs, earthworms, and other soft-bodied critters like caterpillars or fly larvae. A larva will stick its skinny head into a snail shell, bite it and inject it with a neurotoxin and digestive enzymes, and then slurp up some snail soup. Sounds delicious, right? And fireflies' appetite for snails and slugs means that they like valuable pest control in certain farming systems, like rice paddies in parts of Asia and other parts of the tropics. So it's the production of light, or bioluminescence, that fireflies are kind of most famous for. But many people don't realize that, one, not all adult fireflies produce light. Some have lost that ability and adapt or sort of gone in other evolutionary directions. And also that fireflies glow during their immature phases. And the message that's being sent with this light really depends on the life stage. So the larva on the left is saying, don't eat me, you're going to regret it if you do. The female firefly in the middle is saying, I like the looks of you. Yes, let's make more fireflies together. And the adult firefly on the right here is not saying anything at all with light, because it's evolved to be active during the daytime. So you can see that it's missing the yellow light organs on its underside that we usually associate with fireflies. Among the fireflies that flash at night, one of the things about them that has been studied quite a bit is their flash patterns and their communication. So each species has its own distinctive male courtship flash pattern, or in some cases, a repertoire of multiple flash patterns. You can see these two illustrations these two illustrations kind of show the diversity of flash patterns. You have single flashers, double flashers, and multi-pulse flashers. Some are almost like a metronome of quick blinks. Others are more like sporadic flickers. And others are crescendo flashes, kind of 2/3 of the way down on that chart, which begin dimly, build up in brightness, and then end quite abruptly. And even though fireflies are silent, watching them can almost have a musical feeling because of the rhythms involved. I know people who hear firefly flash patterns, and I think that the flash pattern charts can almost look a little bit like sheet music. So earlier I said that the larva was using its light as a warning signal. Sometimes people ask me whether fireflies are good food for birds, and I think they're often like wanting to have a nice kind of explanation of like why fireflies are indispensable in the ecosystem. And my answer is usually, well, probably not. So this sparrow on the left has caught a winter firefly in its beak, taken a risk there. Maybe it's a young bird. And you can see that the winter firefly on the right is doing something called reflex bleeding. So it's releasing that milky hemolymph, and that is full of toxins. These toxins, depending on the type of fireflies, some of them are called lucibufagins or lucibuphagens. And they're cardiac steroids, so they're similar to or cardiac glycosides. So they're similar to the toxins in toads and in milkweeds. It's really nasty stuff that can basically make the hearts of vertebrates stop. Not something that you want to ingest. The big predators of fireflies, of adult fireflies anyway, seem to be other arthropods like spiders or assassin bugs. Another question I get sometimes is, are fireflies pollinators? And the answer is sometimes, but not in a major way. So they'll visit flowers, though they don't necessarily need to eat as adults. And many species seem to like milkweed nectar, which is kind of intriguing. You can see this Big Dipper firefly on the left is nectaring at milkweed. So they visit flowers. They're not like bees. They're probably not super efficient pollinators, but it's likely that at least some fireflies are helping move pollen from flower to flower and plant to plant. So in response to hearing more and more anecdotal reports of people seeing fewer and fewer fireflies, or just not seeing lightning bugs at places where they used to see lightning bugs, the Xerces Society teamed up with the IUCN Firefly Specialist Group and the New Mexico Biopark Society, and in 2020 did red list assessments for about 130, I think the number was 133 firefly species in the US and Canada. So the red list of threatened species is an international framework and methodology for assessing the extinction risk of species of different types. So the takeaways here, the results were released in 2020 and into 2021. The takeaways here are that about 1/6 of firefly species fall within a threatened category. More than half of the species, we just didn't have enough data to give a confident assessment of their conservation status. They could be doing fine and nobody's collecting data on them. Or in some cases, maybe they've gone extinct under our noses. In several cases, the last known records were from 50 years ago or more. And then about a third of species, of firefly species, are in this least concern category, where that doesn't mean they haven't, maybe some due to habitat loss over the years, but they're still very widespread, commonly encountered, and have lots of records. So if you sort of carried over, if you made some projections onto those data deficient categories, 1/3, we could estimate that 1/3 of firefly species may be threatened with extinction. From here, I'm going to zoom in into Maryland, where you all are, and talk about its historic importance in the study of lightning bugs, and then talk about and show you some of the really cool species that you have. So Herbert Spencer Barber is a really important figure in the study of fireflies. He didn't grow up in Maryland. I think he was born in South Dakota and then grew up in Florida for most of his childhood. But he came to Washington, D.C. when he was, I think, in sort of late high school, and became a really amazing entomologist and naturalist. And he did something that most entomologists hadn't really done before, which was to really recognize the utility and importance of flash patterns in describing species. So up until then, there was a group of fireflies, the Photurus fireflies, that maybe had a handful of species, but most of them were lumped under one name. And what Barber realized was that if you paid attention to their flash patterns and the times of their emergence in the season and to their habitat use, and then also to very subtle differences in their morphology, you could see consistent patterns that really what we thought was one thing was actually many different things. So he described 11 species of firefly, all in the genus Photurus. And there's a publication from 1951 that was published posthumously that's still a really important resource for anyone getting to know fireflies. This photo here is of the firefly specimens, kind of shows his approach. So these are synchronous fireflies, Photurus frontalis, and he was collecting, I think during the 40s. Well, actually, this was earlier, 1927. But because of kind of wanting to stay, kind of being thrifty and saving on metal, they just use one pin for three specimens and then use these little paper or cardstock points. But what's really neat here is you can see the flash pattern description along with the specimens, which is something that is missing from many, many collections, still, even modern collections where people will catch a bug and not bother to take flash pattern details. So a little analogy from the bird world, for those of you who are birders, is kind of like the Empidonax flycatchers. So people, you look at a plate of them in a guidebook and you're like, this is ridiculous. This is all the same thing. But when you listen to them, when you tune into their communication between conspecifics, you realize that the vocalizations are really very helpful for ID. And yes, there are some subtle differences in appearance, but again, sort of eavesdropping goes a really long way. I made this map of, this is a sort of a selection of the places where Barber was collecting fireflies and also where he actually described several firefly species from. So these type localities. And this is something that, you all have not too far from you, is these opportunities to revisit sites that he collected at and look at the same population, but 70, 80 generations later. Some of these have probably changed considerably, and others are within conservation areas. So I think it would be really neat to revisit and check on the status, and maybe also go back to type localities and collect specimens for molecular analysis, because that's a question that we face often with our study of fireflies is a firefly that's giving the same flash pattern and is pretty much the same morphologically, out in the Midwest, is that the same species, or how closely related is it to what Barber was seeing when he described them? Another figure in Maryland in the study of fireflies came at it from a very different angle. So this is more in the realm of biochemistry. William McElroy came to Johns Hopkins in the kind of middle of the 20th century. And during the late 1940s and through the 60s, he was studying bioluminescence and the chemistry of it. And to do that, he actually paid kids 25 cents per 100 lightning bugs. And that's how he got the raw material for his studies. So the chemicals that produce light in fireflies, luciferin and luciferase, are now produced synthetically. But for many years, lightning bugs were harvested by the millions to feed the demand for these chemicals. And these chemicals continue to have lots of applications in research and medicine, including things like detecting whether there's microbial life in foods or drugs, because in order to produce light, there has to be ATP, which is the energy molecule of life, and is not going to be present if there is not some organism there. Last summer, I was talking to an acquaintance who's a neurosurgeon, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I use these chemicals, these same chemicals, when figuring out how to treat brain tumors." Kind of wild. So Maryland's lightning bugs at a glance. I'm about to kind of give you some portraits of these species. There are at least 36 species documented in Maryland in 5 different genera. And 5 fall into threatened categories on the red list. 1 is near threatened. And as I mentioned before, there are multiple original species descriptions from Maryland, which is just, it's nice because you all can be confident with your IDs. And it also provides opportunities for follow-up studies. So if you go outside after this talk tonight, you might find this species. This is the earliest flashing firefly species in much of the country. It has a very widespread distribution from Canada down to kind of northern Florida. And its flash pattern is kind of an amber, yellow, kind of orangish yellow, single flash that's repeated every 3 seconds or so. This really cool photo was taken a couple months ago by Matthew Mosquick in North Carolina. It also has a very neat larval natural history. So during most of the year, the larvae are down in the fallen leaves and on tree trunks hunting snails. They're really snail specialists. And then in the spring, they'll climb up the south side of trees. They like sunny areas. And they'll kind of go into the tree bark and they'll pupate in this exposed position. So I'm in the habit of this time of year, I'll look kind of like I'll look a little kooky because I'll be every tree I see, I'm often like, okay, go to the south side and look for look to see any larvae. I have not found any yet, actually. This is the lightning bug that most people think of when they think of lightning bug or firefly. Most of you are probably quite familiar with it. I've heard them kind of affectionately called yard bugs or the all-American firefly. Well, the other common name for them is the common eastern firefly. And at dusk, they give these J-shaped, upward rising yellow flashes that give them their common name, the Big Dipper. And these flashes are happening about every 5 seconds or so. The warmer it is, the closer those flashes will be together. More energy, it's easier to do the chemical reaction. And because of their adaptiveness to landscapes, you can see this is kind of hardly a pristine habitat landscapes that have been altered by humans. I've heard them compared to coyotes. I like to think of them like if they were a bird, they'd be an American robin because it's very widespread. You can find them in suburban backyards. And like robins, they like to eat earthworms. So the larvae are living in the soil, feeding on earthworms. This is like the spring treetop flasher. This is a Pyractomina firefly. And a couple ways you can tell it from the other genera of fireflies is that it has a raised line down the head shield or pronotum. So it's got this kind of distinctive keel. And the shape of the head shield or the pronotum is a little more angled. It's kind of almost, you could almost imagine it being pentagonal if you were to trace it. So this is the Xerces firefly or the candle firefly. And you can see that even though, its body looks fairly similar to the spring treetop flasher, its flash pattern is quite different. So it's this orangish flicker. That's a long series of flashes that are too quick for us to see individually. So if it was a sound, it would be like a trill. And again, this is like the spring treetop flasher. It's widespread. It's in this least concern red list category. Way at the other end of the spectrum is the Bethany Beach firefly. So it's only found in freshwater wetlands behind coastal sand dunes in Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. When it was first assessed, it was believed to only occur in Delaware, but surveys in places like Assateague National Seashore have found some additional populations. In 2019, the Xerces Society and other partners petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, asking them to list this species under the Endangered Species Act. 5 years later, we hear that a listing decision will be made in 2024, but it has not been released, and we don't know what that decision will be. And even though our understanding of its range has expanded over the past couple years as people have looked for it more, it's still very, very vulnerable to things like sea level rise and storms and coastal development. Its flash pattern consists of pairs of greenish flashes. And also the marking on the head tends to be kind of widened. This is a pretty subtle character, and you would definitely want to use the flash pattern in combination with what it looks like. So this is another coastal firefly species in the genus Photurus. You can see that it looks, just in its appearance, it looks pretty similar. Its flash pattern is a single kind of yellowish greenish flash, and it's out over salt marshes, often the highest part of salt marshes, which again is making them more vulnerable to sea level rise as those high marsh areas convert to low marsh, and the creation of high marsh is not a given because there are things like houses and other infrastructure in the upland areas. Photurus, this genus, they're really fascinating because many of them do what's called aggressive mimicry. So the females will imitate the flash patterns of other species in order to lure in those fireflies to catch them and eat them. And in doing so, they get nutrients and they get energy, but they also get toxins that they themselves do not produce, that they're able to pass on to the eggs that they lay. This species was actually described from a coastal site near Annapolis, but there haven't been many recent records from Maryland. Here's an IUCN endangered species. It was only described early in the last 20 years or 15 years or so, the mysterious lantern firefly. And it's you've probably noticed a pattern for the past couple of fireflies that they're specializing in wetlands. And this is continuing that pattern. So in this case, it's found in low peatlands with Atlantic white cedars on the Delmarva Peninsula. And for a good while, it was just known from Delaware, and then surveys just across the state border found them in Maryland as well. So they give this very slow glow every 3 seconds or more while flying, kind of hovering through the understory of these wetlands. The last firefly that I'm showing you tonight is the keel-necked firefly. The common name comes from the trait that all fireflies in the Pyractomina genus have, and that's that raised line down the middle of their head shield. It's not the best common name because it's applicable to the group as a whole. But starting about 40 minutes after sunset, they'll emerge from the salt marsh grasses and give these swooping, glowing green flashes, sometimes rising and sometimes falling. It's a species with an odd distribution. So it's found, it was discovered and described in Florida, and it occurs on the coast of Alabama. And it also occurs in New Jersey and Delaware and Maryland, but it's never been found in Georgia or the Carolinas or Virginia. It's still kind of an open question whether it actually occurs in those areas. Last year, a young naturalist affiliated with the Maryland Biodiversity Project did some surveys on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, and lo and behold, found this species in some salt marshes there that had gone undetected for decades and decades. So it just kind of goes to show that there are lots of discoveries still left to be made, and we can map these species a lot more precisely than we currently have. So this photo I took last July in coastal New Jersey, and you can see that even though I was in a wildlife refuge, and Atlantic City is 4 miles away or something like that, the city lights are still encroaching on the scene. When artificial light is closer to firefly habitats, actually casting light into those habitats, we know that it can interfere with lightning bug communication, behavior, and reproduction. The effects themselves can be kind of complex, and it also differs by species. So the species that display before sunset or at dusk tend to be a lot more resilient or kind of unfazed by artificial light, while those truly nocturnal displaying species will sometimes move away from those areas or flash less. The females will be less likely to respond to male flashes. And then in some cases, you actually have fireflies being drawn to those artificial lights. So instead of spending the night trying to reproduce, they're just kind of sitting by a light bulb, which is not a great way to spend one of the few nights that it has as a reproductive adult. This is a map of artificial light at night, measured from satellites, where white is the brightest areas and the lightish bluish purple is darker, but not entirely dark. So none of this is too surprising. You can see that there's a lot of artificial light in the urban population centers and the transportation corridors. But it's worth noting that artificial light is kind of seeping into the edges of less of rural areas and natural habitats as well. Globally, artificial light at night has been growing very quickly. And there have been some of that has been for good reasons, in that, excuse me, LEDs are much more energy efficient than the sort of preceding technologies. But because they're so cheap, it's very easy to overuse light, and things can kind of the cost can actually like be compensated for because we're spending the same amount and just using way more light. So having talked a little bit about the threat that artificial light poses to lightning bugs, I'm going to talk now about a few ways that we can help lightning bugs thrive. Not just addressing light pollution, but a few other actions as well. So following on the last slide, one thing we can do is just be deliberate and thoughtful about how we use outdoor lighting and indoor lighting for that matter. I think that since becoming someone who spends my days thinking about lightning bug conservation, I'm much more attentive to things like drawing my curtains during the firefly display season. So both of these photos were taken at campgrounds in conservation areas, in this case in Florida. And in both cases, having some outdoor lighting makes sense. People need to do things like check into the campground and find a sink to brush their teeth at. But the park on the right has done a much more thoughtful job here. They're using fairly dim, downward pointing light that is filtered red. So that attracts fewer insects, it allows visitors to retain their night vision, and it minimizes the light that is being cast into surrounding habitats. Fireflies can see red light, but they're much less sensitive to it than yellow light or just sort of broad spectrum light. And then, so the park on the left, I think they just didn't think about it at all. They just grabbed a light fixture and, slapped it on the wall of this campground building. Another action to protect fireflies, if you have a yard, and you've probably heard leave the leaves, multiple times in the past, but it bears repeating just from a firefly perspective. This could mean piling up the leaves into a pile at the edge of your yard. It could mean using fallen leaves as garden mulch in your flower beds or your veggie garden, or it could simply mean just letting the leaves lie where they fall. I often get the question, it's like, okay, like, when can I clean up my leaves? And that's actually a hard question because a lot of firefly larvae are actually living for 2 years. So it's not like there's a time of the year when they don't need that habitat, that cover, that added moisture. I struggle with that question, and it's my response is usually just leave them on your property year round if you're able. And if you don't have a yard, leaving the leaves is something that we can still advocate for in parks and campuses and other managed green spaces. This is kind of an obvious one, but avoiding the use of pesticides is an important way to keep fireflies alive and healthy. And even when pesticides don't directly kill fireflies, they can cause sublethal impacts, like causing larvae to spend less time foraging or building their soil shelters. And then it's also important to remember that combinations of pesticides can sometimes be a lot worse than just single compounds. So the studies that that determine the EPA label and what precautions to take, they don't really take that into account for the most part. So it's really an area to use the precautionary principle. My last plug is to contribute to Firefly research. So last year, the Xerces Society launched the Firefly Atlas, which is a collaborative community science project where firefly enthusiasts, land managers, and researchers can all submit survey and observation data with a focus on imperiled and data deficient species. If you search for species and don't find it, this is really valuable data to have, and it's data that we can't get from something like iNaturalist or other platforms that collect species occurrence records. These are our focal species and focal regions. You'll notice that Maryland is very solidly within one of our focal regions. But there are also data deficient species everywhere and in every state. So if you're motivated to do firefly surveys in your area, the data you generate will help to better understand and protect lightning bugs. On the Firefly Atlas website, we have a filterable checklist. So you can put in MD under distribution, and that'll generate a list of the fireflies that have been documented in the state. And then there are also links to the red list assessments for those species and the NatureServe pages as well. We provide Firefly Atlas data sheets on the website, which is going to guide you on collecting firefly data that's as useful as possible, both in things like how to describe and take notes on firefly flash patterns, but also those variables that might affect how detectable fireflies are, things like the weather and the moon conditions, things like that. There's a training video. It's a little long. I wish that I'd compressed it more, but it does have a table of contents on the Xerces Society YouTube channel that really walks through how to plan, execute a Firefly survey, and then also how to enter the data on the Firefly Atlas website. And then the observations will be looked at by me and by other experts, and they'll help to guide further and conservation action. There's a community science project, Firefly Watch, that Firefly Atlas is kind of standing on the shoulders of. Many of you, some of you may have heard about it or participated in the past. And it's important to note that the Firefly Atlas approach is it's more involved. It asks more of participants in terms of equipment and time. And it can be a little kind of overwhelming when you first get into it. That's something that I experienced 2 years ago when I was first in this job and trying to learn as much about lightning bugs as I could. So my recommendation is if you decide to dive into this world, just kind of take it slow and don't put too much pressure on yourself to get it all at once. Maybe one night you will focus on just taking those flash pattern notes using a voice recorder, how to get those timings between the flashes. And on the next night, you'll actually catch the bugs and photograph them, and practice that, so that you can put the pieces together later. You know, it should be, watching lightning bugs should be something that's that brings joy. So if it's a stressful thing, that's not the goal. And yeah, finally, working in pairs or groups can make Firefly surveys safer, more fun, and more efficient. So definitely encourage folks, if you do participate in the Firefly Atlas, to make it a group activity. I'm actually just gonna end on this slide. Thank you for your time and attention. These show some places where you can go for more information. Websites, the Xerces website and the Firefly Atlas website. And we also have some really great publications that can be downloaded and printed. Everything from Firefly-friendly lighting practices to site manager guides for Firefly tourism sites. So I will open it up for questions, and thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Richard. There's a few questions have come in the chat. I can just kind of scroll up through those. The first one was from Richard. How far off the ground do they typically inhabit?
That can vary between species and then within a species as well. So things like the Big Dipper firefly tend to be kind of between ground level and maybe head height. Paractamina borealis, the spring treetop flasher, true to its name, is often pretty out of reach, and up in the treetops. And then within the same species, sometimes what you'll see, for example, if there's a field and a forest edge, is that they'll just kind of maintain a certain distance from the vegetation, and you'll have the same species kind of blanketing the field and then kind of creating contours on the tree canopy.
So I think I just learned something new, and I've seen sometimes you'll see fireflies up in the treetops and then other fireflies near the ground, and it never occurred to me that those were probably different species. Do you get the spring flashers and like the Big Dippers at the same time of the year, or are they always seasonally?
They would generally not overlap,
Okay.
but there are a lot of phototourists that flash from trees around the same time as the Big Dippers, and I didn't cover those species in this talk, but they're pretty widespread.
Got it. Right on. So then there was a question when we were looking at the photo you took of Atlantic City in the background. Someone asked about how the camera captured the trail of their flashes, and I think someone else responded that it's a long exposure. But do you want to say anything about your photography techniques?
Yeah, I'm not a super I'm not a very technical photographer. I don't get any influencer money or anything from Olympus, but I do really love the Olympus TG series, very rugged point and shoot camera. And there's a setting on that camera that's a live composite. So you'll take an initial exposure that can be anywhere from like 2 seconds to 15 seconds. And then it'll sort of open the shutter for 15 seconds at a time. It'll only add the bright spots to that image. So some of the images that I showed you, it's not a single exposure that's 2 minutes long. It's like 2 minutes worth of 4-second exposures. So it's a stacked image.
Got it. Thank you. That helps. So moving down the list of questions here, are all leaves useful? Native trees, shrubs versus non-native? What about herbaceous leaves? What if the leaves are on manicured lawns? Should the leaves be on gardens to be more productive? There's a rich topic of discussion there. Can you help us with?
Yeah, I don't have the best answers to this. I would probably say that the native leaves are better. But something like Norway maple, I would still think that that's better to leave um, than to remove from your property. So yeah, there may be some cases, maybe you have a magnolia with really leathery leaves and there's just too much buildup. Maybe in those cases you remove, half the leaves or something like that. I think it's an approach that you can tailor to your own setting. But the general principle is that leaves are habitat and they're food for things. So keeping them around is a good idea. And Max, I don't know if any of you have heard a talk by Max Furlado, who's now the state entomologist at Maryland, but he's actually done some like empirical research on the effects of leaving leaves in residential kind of landscape settings. So he has there's some neat lessons that emerged from that, focused on moths. I think it was mostly moths and maybe wasps
Okay,
as well.
perfect. So that question was from Nick, and the next question is from Libby. Do you know if there are species that are dependent on climax forests in Maryland? And it looks like there's a follow-up to that. Also, do they prefer certain trees for climbing up and pupating?
Yeah, I don't know about climax forests. They're definitely species that you just won't find outside of forests. And there are also some species where the females are don't have functional wings or wings they can fly with. And those are
Mhm.
species that we kind of think like if the site has a history of like major soil disturbance or habitat disruption, that there probably is going to take a lot longer to repopulate that area. Um, the the blue ghost firefly, which I'm not sure it's documented in Maryland, but it is in places like Virginia and West Virginia. Um,
Following up, a similar question from Chris. We found gray dogwood completely covered in fireflies. Would that be breeding behavior?
um, yeah, I don't know if those were winter fireflies, um, which are the non-flashing kind of spring flying fireflies. They're very widespread, like very common species. Um, they may like the kind of furrows in the bark, and this goes back to the last question that I think I neglected to answer. There have been some studies with that Paractomina pupating in tree bark that they and crevices. So things like white oak and hickory, I think maybe ash as well, are going to be better for those species than something with really smooth bark.
Okay, great. So then we have a question from Angela regarding the reflex bleeding. Do they release these cardiac glycosides only when consumed, or would just holding them trigger the bleeding? And is it corrosive to skin too, or only for internal organs?
As far as I know, it's not corrosive to skin, but yes, just holding them will produce that smell. And some people think of like, oh, lightning bugs have a distinctive smell, like when you caught them as a kid and put them in your mayonnaise jar. That probably some of that is from the reflex bleeding.
Awesome. Adele asked if you could repeat the name of the UMD scientist, and then Angela responded that it's Max Furlado.
Yeah.
Okay. For those who are watching this later on YouTube, who don't have access to our chat, Max Furlado, Ferlauto, research on leaf litter removal. Awesome. Thank you for that.
And there's a recording of a presentation on YouTube of a presentation he gave on his dissertation work. I learned a lot from it, and it helped me also understand that part of what leaves are doing is buffering the soil from extreme temperatures. So it's acting like a kind of a insulation blanket.
Mm-hmm. All right, that seems to have exhausted the chat questions. Anything else?
Yeah, I see it. I see that comment from Gail saying that years ago they were driving back to Maryland from Delaware through miles of flat farmland, and there must have been millions of fireflies flashing on and off for miles. That it was magical. Yeah, I am every field season I pinch myself a little bit that part of my job gets to be being outside, soaking in the wonder of flashing fireflies. A Xerces volunteer recently asked if there were any studies about watching fireflies lowering blood pressure, and there aren't any, but we were like, I think I know what our hypothesis would be.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Richard, for sharing your time with us and for getting us excited about fireflies. It's just about the time of year, isn't it? We just start by looking for them.
Yeah, it starts earlier than most folks realize. So there are iNaturalist records right now from the Baltimore area of the spring treetop flashers.
And what's like the latest that we're likely to see them on average?
I've seen them into September. It's a different. Oh, are you talking about that particular species or fireflies generally?
Well, I think I was thinking fireflies generally, but for those of us who do not live in like remote forested areas, the kinds that you're likely to see in your suburban lawns, like the Big Dippers and so on. How late in the year can we expect those?
Yeah, for the Big Dippers, kind of mid-June through like 4th of July is often kind of when a lot of people associate with like prime density of flashes. But again, you can see there's some late season species, and in some species there'll be actually a second brood or generation that pops up in August after a little bit of a quiet period in July.
Is there a peak observation time, Angela wants to know?
I mean, if I had to choose just like one week, and that was the only time I got to go look for lightning bugs in Maryland, it would be somewhere between late June and mid-July. But I would be limiting myself of which species I could see.
A couple other questions have come in here. So this is interesting. If you went to a rural field and netted a couple hundred lightning bugs, could you increase your backyard population? Could you take them and have them breed somehow?
Maybe. There are cases of Big Dipper fireflies showing up in places like in potting soil and that sort of thing, and they're fairly adaptable. I wouldn't advocate for that as like your top tactic, because habitat and connectivity is going to be the
Yeah, I think generally we don't want to be removing wildlife from its habitat and taking it home with us.
There was actually also a case in Japan where there was a relocation or reintroduction, and it messed with population genetics. So it moved it made the local ecotype kind of get suppressed
Hmm.
compared to whatever they moved in just kind of took over. So
Right.
there's some risk of like loss of genetic diversity.
Makes sense. And then Jen wants to know, are there synchronous fireflies in there?
There are. So when I worked at Congaree National Park, that park in mid-May attracts thousands of people, or they've kind of made it more manageable. So hundreds of people, let's say, every May to watch synchronous fireflies. But that same species called snappy single sync is found all the way up kind of onto the Delmarva Peninsula and in Maryland. It's a species um, that Barber found in Maryland back in the previous century.
Okay, so that was the one that we saw with one pin and three sticks. It was fun.
Exactly.
Right on.
Exactly. Yeah. And the time for that would be like first half of June. Um, late May through first half of June in Maryland.
And I think so. I've got a couple more questions coming in, and then I think we probably need to wrap this up because we're getting
Sure.
past 8 o'clock here. But one on how long do fireflies live as an adult? And then the other question, what is the primary reason for reduced populations in Maryland? Is it artificial lighting and loss of habitats?
Yeah, I would say that habitat loss is probably at the very top of the list. You know, it's taking away a place to live and food to eat is a pretty good way to undermine a population. But it's with insect declines, we really think that it's not just one thing. It's a storm of threats that that fireflies are facing.
And how long do they live as an adult was the other question. You mentioned the larvae live up to 2 years.
Yeah, there's the winter firefly is a little bit of a sort of outlier or edge case, and you'll find them on trees from like October through May. So they live many months as adults, but they're kind of hunkered down. Most lightning bugs and the flashing ones, they live a matter of weeks. So I'd say 6 weeks would be 6 weeks is more like how long the season, the flashing season for a species might last. 2 to 4 weeks is more typical. A lot of times the adults don't even eat. Their sole mission is to reproduce, and then they die pretty shortly after that.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Richard, as always, for all of the amazing, useful information. I very much appreciate it. See you all next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all. Appreciate your attention.